Good afternoon and welcome to the Pennsylvania Press Club. I'm Francine Schertzer, Senior Vice President of Politics and Policy at PCN, Pennsylvania of the Pennsylvania Press Club, and your host for today's luncheon. Thank you for those who are joining us at the head table today, Aaron Chapin of PSCA and Eric Epstein from Rock the Capitol. Thank you for your support and thank you for being here. The Pennsylvania Press Club Luncheon Series could not be possible without the support of the generous organizations listed on our sponsor banner. Today's luncheon is being taped and will be carried throughout Pennsylvania to the television and streaming audience of PCN. Our speaker today is Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. Representative Malcolm Kenyatta is a third-generation North Philadelphia native and legislator, currently serving in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. He earned a BA in Public Communication and a minor in Political Science from Temple University, an MS in Strategic and Digital Communication from Drexel University, and completed the Harvard Kennedy School's Executives in State and Local Government program. In 2023, he was appointed by President Joe Biden to chair the Presidential Advisory Commission on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Black Americans. Representative Kenyatta is a barrier-breaking public figure, becoming the first openly LGBTQ plus person of color and one of the youngest people elected to the Pennsylvania General Assembly in 2018. In 2022, he became the first openly LGBTQ person of color to seek a U.S. Senate seat in American history. In April 2024, he made history again as the first openly LGBTQ person ever nominated for statewide office by a major political party in Pennsylvania when he became the Democratic nominee for Auditor General. In the general election, he earned nearly 3.1 million votes, the second highest vote total for any Democrat in the ticket that year. In February 2025, he was elected as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. Throughout his career, Representative Kenyatta has been a vocal proponent of protecting workers' rights and rooting out government corruption and waste. He holds multiple legislative leadership roles, including as a member of the powerful State Government Committee with oversight of state agencies and elections, where he chairs the Subcommittee on Government Operations, chair of the Financial Services and Banking Subcommittee in the Commerce Committee, and as a member of the Finance and Judiciary Committees. In 2020, he was chosen to give the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention alongside a group of other rising stars. And in 2024, he returned to the DNC as an individual speaker, continuing to represent the next generation of Democratic leadership. His groundbreaking political career and personal life have been the subject of 2 award-winning documentaries, including an Al Roker-produced feature-length film, Kenyatta, Do Not Wait Your Turn. Representative Kenyatta lives in North Philadelphia with his husband, Dr. Matthew Kenyatta, and their dog, Cleo. Representative Kenyatta, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, thank you. I grew up in a black church. I got to hear somebody say something. No, I'm in the right spot. I want to thank the Pennsylvania Press Club for this opportunity and look forward to answering your questions. But I will tell you, this morning, I'm actually thinking a lot about Gettysburg. And not just because the president fired the park rangers who should be touring folks around one of our great treasures. But I'm thinking about it because of some remarks that I gave there a little over 4 years ago. During those remarks, I said that democracy requires something of us, of each and every one of us. And I think in this moment, we should all be reminded of that. You know, when you're in the eye of the storm, when you're in the thick of something, it can be a little difficult to really pay attention to the significance of the moment that you're in, because you're in it. But we are in one such moment for our nation's history. A moment where we are literally called to answer the question whether or not the most important democracy, I believe, to have ever existed in the face of this world, the most powerful beacon of truth and hope and justice, not just for people here, but abroad. Whether or not we're going to give up that mantle in pursuit of somebody's ego and their consolidation of power. You know, we're here today just a day over 3 years after the illegal, vicious, and barbaric invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And just last week, our president, which should be standing up for Ukraine, which should be continuing our commitment, is not doing that anymore. He's walking away. He called Vladimir Zelensky a brutal dictator, but dodged whether or not Vladimir Putin was a dictator. I never thought a day where I'd see any president abdicate their responsibility to the peaceful world order. Never thought I'd see the day. We meet here today as we still see global uncertainty because of the proposed tariffs. Tariffs that in the previous Trump administration had a real impact on Pennsylvania's farmers and others who engage and sell things abroad. And as I know I don't have to tell you in this room, agriculture is a big deal here in Pennsylvania. And the list goes on, and I will talk more about my challenges with this current administration and the policy differences we have throughout this conversation. But I do want to make this point, and it's one that I've made consistently and particularly in Democratic spaces. I am not a Democrat because I hate Republicans. Be very clear on this. I'm not a Democrat because I hate Donald Trump. When I got registered as a Democrat, the only thing Donald Trump was to me was the guy who had the cameo in Home Alone 2. That's all I knew about it. I didn't get involved in politics because I hated someone. I reiterate this because it feels like in this moment, the currency is to show how vicious you can be, how nasty you can be, how many people you can put down. And if you bully enough people, if you're nasty enough, it seems like that'll get you great success. But I'm actually involved in politics because there are people I love. Many of you know my story, some of you don't. I was born and raised in a working poor family in North Philadelphia. If you know Temple University, not only do you know my district, but you know exactly where I'm from. My dad was trained as a social worker right there at the university. And while he was getting his BA in social work, he was lucky to meet a cute little thing named Kelly Kenyatta, my mama. And they, a couple months later, had me. Now, I like to say this because it is completely true. I got the best parents in the world, okay? Second only to your parents, who I imagine were fantastic. But the difference and the trouble with my parents were, as great as they were, they did not like each other. And so what that meant for me is they separated when I was pretty young. I got my first job at 12 years old, washing dishes at a little vegan soul food restaurant, believe it or not. And what I was really lucky, because that job under the table, now if you have a business, we got people from the chamber here and everywhere else, you can't be paying people under the table. Don't do what they do. But I was lucky because that job gave me the opportunity to just give my mama a little bit of wiggle room. Some of you know about needing wiggle room, about being in the grocery store aisle and filling up that cart with great hopes and expectation and having to take things out of that cart. I will tell you, I bought this carton of eggs on the way here because I wanted to make a point. This was almost $9. Okay? Now, for folks who are better at math than Malcolm Kenyatta, that's a almost 300% increase from just a couple of weeks ago. And so I know that politics and often the headlines that come out of political discourse are usually about politician A said this, politician B said this, and so let's write a headline about the argument between those two folks. But for the mom and dad who was also in Weis Markets like I was, paying $9 for a carton of eggs, this is not about an argument between two politicians. This is real life. This is real life. And I think that we deserve sober, serious leadership that's going to be focused on making sure we lower costs for people all across this Commonwealth. Sober, serious leadership that understands what I understand about not having the type of housing stability that every single family deserves. I moved 5 or 6 times by the time I graduated high school. I knew exactly what it meant for my mom to come home and sit us down and say, like, I'm sorry to tell you, we're not going to be able to stay here. And put everything we got into a couple of trash bags to move to the next place. For some people, that's hypothetical. That's anecdotal. For me, it's real. For so many of the families who are worried right now about whether or not this illegal federal freeze is going to allow them to drop their kids off at Head Start, this is not an argument between two people. This is real. This is their life. For folks who are worried about what $830 billion of cuts in Medicaid would mean for their families, this is not some hypothetical thing. This is real. And eggs are $9, and yet still, Republicans in Congress are advancing a proposal that would cut SNAP food assistance by over $230 billion. This is not a joke. And so in this moment, and I'm sure a lot of your questions will be, well, what are the Democrats going to do to stop this guy? But preserving our democracy is not just the job of the Democratic Party, actually, even though the names are similar. When the president kicks out the AP, the frickin' AP, from engaging in their responsibility as the fourth estate because they didn't write an article or the way he wanted to, that's not just the Democratic Party's responsibility, that's everybody's responsibility. When the president walks away from our commitment to our allies, that's not just the Democrats' responsibility to say something about that, that's everybody's responsibility. When people cannot afford their lives in the greatest country to ever exist, that is not just the responsibility of the Democrats, that's everybody's responsibility. But let me also be clear on this before we take your questions. The Democratic Party is not just the 8 people who were just elected recently in National Harbor to lead it. Democratic Party is made up of millions of people and millions more that we are going to register who believe in a future that is brighter than the one we have right now. I think people who bet against America are wasting their money. I do believe, even in this moment, where it feels like folks in my party might be afraid about the future, I'm not afraid about the future. Because I know that we have been in similar places before. You know, there's an old idiom that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And in this moment, we're hearing a lot of rhyming of people who believe that might makes right, not the other way around. Of people who believe that they can bully folks into submission. Of people who believe that they can tear up parts of the Constitution they don't like. We have been here before. And I will end with this note because I'm from Philadelphia. We don't like kings. This entire experiment, us sitting here, is a complete rejection of kings. And so I don't care who puts that on their Instagram. I'm not bending the knee. The Democratic Party is not bending the knee. And we're certainly not rolling over. And we're going to continue to fight to win not just elections, but to win the responsibility of public office to make things better for people and the families we serve. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Would American politics be better if political parties were stronger? Could parties pick better candidates than primary voters?
So absolutely not. I'm a big believer in people being able to weigh in and choose who represents them at every single level, first in the primary process, but then beyond. But also let me make very clear, I'm a co-sponsor of an open primaries bill along with Representative Chairman Solomon, because I believe that we see millions of Pennsylvanians who are not affiliated with a political party, who can't participate in local elections that in many instances are decided in the primaries. And so, listen, I know there's a lot that happens in Harrisburg that is important at the state level, but the people who pick up your trash don't work in the state capitol. And usually, no matter where you live, one political party or the other, is probably going to be the way the election ultimately goes. And so when people don't have the option and the ability to weigh in during that process, I think that that's also a problem. So, I'm going to continue to push for that legislation and push for legislation that not only strengthens the security of our elections, but legislation that makes sure that every single eligible voter can vote.
What did the Democratic Party do wrong in the last election cycle, and how do you redirect for the next election?
So I want to start with the end of that question. There is a, principle that I've heard bandied about military circles that you don't fight the last war. And I think that we're in a position right now where, as important as it is and as interesting as it is to continue to opine over the last election, the next election is not going to be about the last election. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we spend every single day trying to Monday morning quarterback. The only quarterback I know and care about is Jalen Hurts, who was the MVP, by the way. And I did not join the leadership of this party to do that. People in this last election worked their hearts out. And we should be very clear that Democrats suffered a narrow election loss. And I highlight that narrow part because I saw a poll from YouGov a couple of weeks ago where 46% or something of Americans incorrectly believe that Donald Trump's popular vote margin was bigger than Joe Biden's. That's wrong. And I think that that's important because what we saw in the last election were a lot of people who decided not to engage in the electoral process at all. A lot of people who threw up their hands and said, Democrat, Republican, Independent, I don't believe any of you are actually in it for me. And that's not just a problem for the Democratic Party in one election. That is a problem for our system of government. That is the problem for the future of Pennsylvania. That is a problem for the future of the United States. It was one of the reasons I ran for a job that a lot of people told me was boring, because you got to get in the weeds and try to help people understand how government works and do things to actually make government more efficient. Firing the people who are dealing with bird flu doesn't make government more efficient. Getting rid of the people summarily overnight who take care of our nuclear weapons, I don't think that's pretty efficient either. And shutting down the folks who help people see our national parks, which generate millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars here in Pennsylvania and across the country, that's not efficient either. There's nothing efficient about chaos. And what we have seen right now is chaos. It's a part of the reason you've seen the president's approval rating go into the toilet. And it's odd that I have to talk to you this morning about the approval ratings of an unelected billionaire from South Africa, but here I am talking about the bad approval ratings of an unelected billionaire from South Africa. Now, there are a lot of good friends who want to talk about immigration reform. I know an unelected billionaire from South Africa that maybe should be a part of that conversation. In this moment, I think the Democrats need to do a couple of things, and I've been sort of saying it as LME. The first thing we have to do is litigate. I have said it before, but it is worth underscoring. The president has been doing a lot of illegal things, and it's not Malcolm's opinion. These are opinions coming out of multiple federal districts. One of the illegal things he has done makes a big impact here in Pennsylvania, and it's part of the reason the governor is suing him, because he has illegally withheld over $2 billion that was appropriated to projects right here in Pennsylvania, a part of which was helping people lower the cost of their energy bills. And in a state that believes in our energy sector, that supports our energy sector, we should be doing nothing to raise the cost of people's energy bills, but that's exactly apparently what this guy wants to do. Illegally, by the way, illegally. The second thing we have to do is to mobilize people, and I think you're seeing that mobilization. Not just on the state capitol, where people showed up on President's Day, but all across this country, where people have been peacefully using their right to petition their government and to make clear their frustration with the chaos and nonsense that's happening in D.C. We're seeing it. Folks who are members of Congress are coming home to constituents in very red districts, by the way, who are very disappointed by the legislature completely abdicating its responsibility. I mean, I look at some members of Congress and I say, what the hell did you run for? I've run for tough races, and you all remind me of the ones that I've lost. But I would not be sitting in the legislature just waiting to get orders from the executive. The legislature is an equal, separate, and I think probably the most important branch of our three branches of government. But we have people who are sitting in Washington like seat fillers at the Oscars or something, just clapping, getting up, getting down, clapping. Now listen, I'm a Baptist, but I love going to visit my friends at Catholic Church. We get up, we get down, it's a lot of fun. But that is not what the hell should be happening in Congress, and it's what's happening. You have members of Congress who are going to the administration begging for money for their districts as they cut it everywhere else. Turns out, the Constitution says the legislature has the authority as it relates to our expenditures, has the power of the purse. And they've given over the purse to a megalomaniac who wants to just give out the dollars to the people who bow the lowest before him. That is not America.
Amen.
And I remember, some of my Republican friends being very upset when President Obama said he was going to use a pen strategy, being very upset about that and calling him a king in a derogatory way. And now they're liking the post of Donald Trump calling himself a king. This is ridiculous, and it should be called out as that. So anyway, the mobilize thing, let me go back to the LME, okay? So we have to litigate, we have to mobilize, which is happening, but then also we have to win elections. And I think in this moment, it is alluring to believe that everything of significance that is happening in DC. But I don't believe we got to where we are simply because we lost one election. We got to where we are because Democrats took our eyes off the ball in terms of the local elections. It was not in DC where folks were gerrymandering maps beyond recognition. That was happening in state capitals. It was not in DC where school boards were banning books. That was happening where people live, where they live. It was not in DC where folks are using zoning policies to bottle up affordable housing. That's happening where you live. And so if you look at what this party believes and what we're doing, I think you look no further than the fact that Ken Martin, our chair, the first stop he made as chair was with me in Western Pennsylvania to support Dan Guggenauer, who is hopefully going to replace my dear friend Matt Gergely, who tragically passed. And let me just say as an aside, Matt was one of the best people to ever come to Harrisburg and serve. And so please continue to keep his family in prayer.
What insights do you take away from your statewide campaign across the Commonwealth?
That Pennsylvania is really reflective of this country. It was 538 who did a study where they looked at geography, income, religious affiliation, and found that Pennsylvania, better than any other state, best reflected the country as a whole. And I think in going around, what you saw is a lot of people who have given up on our system of government, who do not believe that anybody is in it for them. And as I said, and I will continue to say, that's interesting for electoral reasons, but it is a crisis when we think about the future of this country. And that's why at the Democratic Party, and you'll see us continue to do a lot more of this, not only are we opposing and being as loud as possible about the chaos cuts that we're seeing come out of this administration, but also it's an important moment to remind people what folks in government actually do. When government is working, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about the fact that there is somebody who is checking your food to make sure that when you sit your kids down for dinner, you're not serving them a meal that's poisoned. Somebody who does that. It's somebody who makes sure that when you have to go on a business trip or you going somewhere for vacation, that they're checking the skies to make sure the traffic in the air is going the way that it should. There's a person that actually does that. There is a person that makes sure that if you go on that hike, or Pennsylvania's great escape, as the governor would say over here, and somebody gets hurt and you need search and rescue, there's somebody who actually comes and finds you and gets you. There's somebody who does that. So many of those folks are without any rhyme or reason being let go of their jobs. And I think in this moment, this is a good opportunity for us to not only reimagine government, as we should always be in the mode of trying to reimagine government, but a moment to reiterate what these positions actually do. Because so many folks who serve here in the Capitol and serve in other government positions, many of them are there for years and years and years, through Republican, Democratic administrations. They're there just doing the work. They're part of public service. And because they are not politicians, they don't get to go and give press conferences about the good work that they did every day. Politicians go and take credit for the work that they do and then try to avoid any accountability if their work is not up to snuff. But those folks do critical work. And turns out, they're not just Democrats who work in our government, it's also independents and Republicans who work there. And all across this Commonwealth, we need to be doing everything we can to be educating people about what government does and to work in a bipartisan way to actually be more efficient. I'm all for that. But what's happening right now is chaos, plain and simple.
Should the legislative surplus, a record $300 million, be audited by the Auditor General?
There are a lot of things I thought the Auditor General should be audited. And I don't know if he's going to take my advice or not. But absolutely. I mean, we need to be looking across government about how we spend all of our collective money. And there are a lot of important investments that we need to make in the people of Pennsylvania, and that's going to be a part of this budget conversation. Obviously, I think priority number one is we have to continue our investment in education and dealing with the fact that we have historically underfunded our schools. Aaron and I were talking about this a little bit, as you might imagine. I think that one of the things that we also need to not walk away from our commitment to is to deal with our school facilities issues. I mean, I have Masterman High School in my district. And folks don't know Masterman. It's the fourth best school in the country, okay, based on the ratings. Masterman has a building that if you walked in there, and I just told you it's the fourth best, you walk into the building, you see incredible and talented educators who are prepping for their classes in the hallway because they don't have their own stable classroom because the building is too small, it's too old, it's run down. And that's true all across the Commonwealth. You know, being, a state that is this old, it means we have a lot of old buildings. And I think we have a real responsibility to make sure that where we drop off our kids, that it's a place that is safe and they're getting a high quality education that not only I think moralistically they deserve, but our Constitution says we must provide. And so as a part of this budget, along with legalizing recreational cannabis, which I think we ought to do to bring in new funds, getting to bipartisan agreement around skilled games and making sure they don't get to operate in a legal gray zone. That's something as well that can bring in additional revenue. And I think we need to move the needle on a variety of other things, including regulatory reform, so that people who have a small business aren't spending every single day filling out paperwork. Nobody opened a business to fill out paperwork, I'll tell you that. Unless they, are an accountant or something, maybe that's what they wanted to do. But most people had a good idea and they wanted to be in their business, not submitting ridiculous stuff to us that is unnecessary, and by us I mean government. And so there are things across the board that we can do, and I'm going to continue my commitment to advocate for those things during the budget process.
Would you support a work search requirement for able-bodied, working-age adults to receive public benefits as an alternative to cuts?
So I think one of the things, I have to push back against the premise of this question. There is a myth going back for a long time that people who are receiving public benefits want to be receiving public benefits. And the only people who say that have never received public benefits, or they did so long ago that now that silver spoon that's now in their mouth, all they can taste is the metal. Most people like me knows what it means to be standing in that line, embarrassed as hell, about having to have SNAP benefits or whatever else. Most seniors did not work their entire life to now be depending on SNAP benefits, but that's where they find themselves because of the lack of support that we provide for elder Pennsylvanians. And so there are things that we can do smartly to better support people. That's why in a bipartisan fashion, I'm happy to say, we gave the largest single tax break in a long time to Pennsylvania seniors with the expansion of the rent and mortgage rebate program, I think first time in 32 years, and not only expanded the awards, but expanded the amount of people who are eligible for that program. People are working. The problem is people are working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs. The problem is we have not reimagined TANF or other social safety net programs since the 90s to meet the realities of this moment. If you look at some of the requirements around TANF, you have requirements to say basically if you're in a 2-person household, you can't receive TANF funds irrespective of what those 2 people are bringing in or what they're not bringing in. That makes no sense. It doesn't make sense. It benefits no one when we have people who don't have the resources they need to take care of themselves, to feed their kids. Feeding Pennsylvanians and feeding Americans should not be a partisan issue. Again, it's a nice thing moralistically, like I feel strongly that we should feed people. My faith teaches me about that. But also, you know what? We have a lot of Pennsylvania farmers who not only provided food to USAID, by the way, but also to the PA Surplus program and many other things. And so when we invest in our supplemental nutrition aid program, that's not only a good deal for the people who receive those funds, but it's a good deal for Pennsylvania farmers, and I'm going to continue to stand up for that program.
What is most likely to be passed in the budget, recreational marijuana or skills games regulation and taxation?
Where's Senator Pittman when you need him? Let me say this. I hope both. This shouldn't be an either or. As I think many of you know, particularly Andrew Lewis, who served me in the House, I always say what I think. Sometimes I say too much of what I think is a problem for my staff. But I think the likelihood is that we'll probably get skilled games more before we get legalizing recreational cannabis, and it's a big mistake if my hunch is correct. Large majorities of Pennsylvanians understand that we should not continue to criminalize people for having a joint, and we also should not continue to leave our farmers at a competitive disadvantage when you look at folks around the country who are growing hemp products and growing cannabis. It's a big mistake. And, the governor said this in his budget address, and I would reiterate it. People are still smoking weed, even though we haven't legalized it. I hope people understand. And what they're doing is going to buy it in other states. And I'm a little bit selfish when it comes to Pennsylvania. I think that Pennsylvania ought to be getting that money. I think we ought to have the best products that people leave those states and come to Pennsylvania, because we have a system that is safe and secure, and because we encourage innovation, because we have a license process that is not arduous, that we allow people to get into the game, open up small businesses, and really not only begin to provide the medication that so many people desperately need. And we could spend a whole day talking about the impacts of cannabis for our veterans and the important impacts that it's made on folks struggling with PTSD, folks who are dealing with chronic pain, many of our union members who've gotten up every single day at the crack of dawn to build our Commonwealth, who now need a little bit of relief. But we also know that when you look at the fatality rates of people who are using cannabis versus other substances, much fewer than people who are drinking alcohol, for example, that even with some of the rules that we have is much more accessible to the average person. But the other thing is, this is an issue of public safety. There are a lot of people, drug dealers, who are still illegally selling weed. I want to put those drug dealers out of business. And I want somebody to open a legal small business in their place. That's what we ought to do. But we also ought to make sure that along as doing this process, that so many of those people who had that blunt in their pocket, whose lives were upended because they were caught with it, that those people's records can be cleared and that they can go out and not have this scarlet letter on their records for the rest of their lives, but that we can continue to expand what we have done here in a bipartisan way with the leadership of Representative Delosier, Representative Harris, passed with broad bipartisan support. The Clean Slate Act is what I'm referencing here. We have an opportunity to supercharge that program and put people in a position where they can actually go out and continue their lives. And if folks in this room want to be honest, there might be some folks in this room who also had a joint in their pocket. You just weren't caught. Okay, and so for folks who say, well, look at them with their records, a lot of people are benefiting from their mama's prayers and they got lucky, but they didn't not do the wrong thing. And so we have an opportunity to infuse Pennsylvania's coffers with some much needed recurring revenue, deal with a criminal justice system that has for too long separated too many families, and then also, I think, really blow up the opportunity for people who have a good idea and want to start a small business to have the opportunity to do so.
Whole Foods workers recently voted for union representation with UFCW 1776.
Hell yeah.
How will you and your colleagues stand in support of these workers, especially with the NLRB decimated?
So I was standing with those workers literally as they were going through that process. I remember once, it was during my last campaign, I forget who the reporter was asking me a question about, it might have been our friend Dennis Owens, who said, well, you get a lot of money from the unions, Malcolm. I'll tell you this. I am in the tank for working people and working families. You want to know who Malcolm's on the side of? Working people and working families. And the folks who get up every single day, those workers who we called essential during the pandemic, you may remember, who were showing up to the grocery store to make sure you could feed your family, not knowing how to protect themselves or their own families, who were opening up that grocery store every single day. Many of them, all they got was a damn banner saying thank you. And if they were lucky, they got a pizza party. People don't want a frickin' pizza party. They want to be paid. And then they'll buy their own pizza. People want to be treated with dignity, decency, and respect. They deserve that. And I will tell you this. I know there are a lot of folks in the business community here. Being pro-worker is not being anti-business. Let me say that again. Being pro-worker is not being anti-business. I don't know a person who has ever been on a strike who wants to be on strike. You walk around a picket line as many times as I've been there, people want to be doing the thing that they're doing. They want to be generating business and opportunity and productivity for the businesses that in so many instances they've spent their entire lives at. But they also want to benefit from the success of that business. And they deserve every opportunity to do so. I know that, people write about me and write about my record. But I'll tell you this, I have actually a pretty bipartisan record. Go check the results. Because I look for any opportunity to do what Mike Boyle, might remember, was a representative from Philly. He said something to me when I first won my primary, and I never ever forget it. And he passed a little bit after, which is why I think about it often. He said, Malcolm, when the election is over, you fight hard in the election, but when the election is over, it is your responsibility to try to see in your colleagues what the voters in their district saw in them. And he said that you will be reminded when you're in Harrisburg that you can't even pass a fart unless you get at least one other person to agree with you. And I think we do better when the other person who agrees with you is from a different political party, if you can get it. And I also mention that because prior to coming to the legislature, people don't this gets X'd out of my bio somehow. But I worked at the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce with a former Republican Senator, Rob Wunderling, for a number of years, helping to grow businesses across the Southeast region because I believe in the power of business. But what I don't believe is leaving the people behind who make that business run. I know that Jeff Bezos, his name is on the big fancy company, but I've never seen him working at the local Whole Foods where I go. I've never seen him there. And maybe he has been. But he doesn't know a damn thing about restocking a shelf. He doesn't know anything about it. And those people deserve their work to be treated with value. And again, not just valued in flowery language, valued in their paycheck. So we have a responsibility to do that, and we're going to keep standing up for workers.
If credit unions market their services as banking done better, shouldn't credit unions pay taxes just like banks?
Well, I will tell you that. Now this is the first question where I'm gonna get a little dodgy, because I think that's complicated. That's complicated. Our credit unions serve a unique purpose in our economic tapestry. And I think that we ought to be figuring out ways to not only support our credit unions, but as you heard the governor talk about in the budget, and I would associate myself with that, we ought to figure out how we can streamline our tax burden across the board. The governor mentioned, a banking tax that's from the, 19th century or something. I think those are conversations that we ought to have. But I want to go back to my point about working people, even though this wasn't in your question, that if we're going to lower the CNI, for example, we also be looking at ways that we can better invest in working families and giving them a leg up, how we can help to use real reform in our tax system to also provide supports for people who need help paying for childcare, for example. Some of you have kids and you know that childcare can be more expensive than sending your kid to college. And after all you pay for childcare, they better go to college and be really successful. I think that we should do this in a comprehensive way, looking at our credit unions, looking at our banks. I think that that's something that should be a part of a comprehensive strategy of what Pennsylvania's tax policy is in general. And that's something that will probably, come before the committee in some way. So I'm going to hold my fire there beyond what I've said.
Do you think Attorney General Sunday will ever stand up for the people of Pennsylvania against the Trump administration's un-American, unconstitutional actions?
Listen, I got to know Dave traveling around the Commonwealth, and he won an election. And with that election came an awesome responsibility to not only be the chief law enforcement officer for Pennsylvania, but to be a protector for the people of Pennsylvania, for our Constitution, and for our citizens. And so, listen, I am not a lawyer, but when you see people doing a bunch of illegal things that are ripping money out of the pockets of Pennsylvanians, I would hope that you would have something to say about that. One of the roles that the Attorney General has that often gets ignored is around consumer protection. And when you have the White House, again, illegally shutting down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which returned billions of dollars, with a B, billions of dollars, back to not just Pennsylvanians, but to Americans who were screwed over by scams, I think that that's something that's worth protecting. It's one of the reasons you've seen 22, I believe, attorneys generals sign on to a lawsuit to try to stop the illegal dismantling of that agency. I've repeated this, and I know you get, if you had a bingo card, I've said illegal too many times, and so now you don't have another space. But what has been done is illegal. It's illegal. And I don't care how many photo ops where this guy sits at the desk and just signs something. Just signing something doesn't actually make it the law. It's not how the law works. And I would hope that we'd have a chief law enforcement officer that remembers his oath and the commitment that he made to the people of Pennsylvania to stand up for everybody. I heard him talk about that. It's important that he did talk about that. I congratulate him on a really big and important job, and I hope that he would do it for all the people of Pennsylvania.
Where do you see House Bill 31, which would amend the Pennsylvania Constitution to create an independent legislative redistricting commission, going in the legislative session this year?
I don't know, and I believe I've been signed on to that in previous iterations. This is not really complex to voters. I know it's complex in Harrisburg. The voters kind of should get to pick the people who represent them, not the other way around. I don't know that we should get to say, well, that community didn't vote for me at high rate, so let's cut them out. I mean, some of the previous map lines that we've had, before I used to say they look like they're drawn by a kindergartner, but I have some incredible kindergartners in my district who draw some beautiful things, and they would not even conceive of something so illogical as the lines that we have seen over the years. And so I think we're in a spot right now where if we're going to restore trust which again, you've heard me say over and over again, restore people's faith in their government, that it's working for them. That a part of how you do that is by making sure that the districts that they get to vote in are districts that are fair and that make sense, that you have communities of interest who are combined, that you try to make them as contiguous as possible. And so, I think we did a better job of that in this last cycle. And I don't just say that because the Democrats took the House by 1 seat, but I say it because it's only a 1-seat majority. And if you look at Pennsylvania, I think that's pretty reflective of where we are. That's who we are, very narrow majorities. I think that's who Pennsylvanians are. And I think if we look at that as not as a negative thing, but as a positive thing, then we believe in this idea, of working together. I have this letter that I carry around with me a lot. There was a guy who served in the Marines. His last name was Marks, and he lives here in this region. He sent me a letter here that I often carry with me. I met him in an interesting way. I was getting an endorsement from Planned Parenthood and HRC, and he was not there in support of my endorsement, okay, by the way. And he was there protesting and doing it in a very creative way. And the Capitol Police, doing the right thing, came to try to take him away, and I said, let him stay. He has every right to be here, to express his view. We deal with those differences through the electoral process, and so people who disagree with him, go vote for me. People who agree with him, you might want to vote for the other guy. Now afterwards, he sent me this letter and sent me this $1. And I'll just read a little section of what he said. He said, I've never given any money to any politician in my life. When I was working, I would blow $100 and think nothing of it, but would not give a dime to any politician. Now living on Social Security, I hope you see the deep depth of what I'm doing. I've enclosed this $21 for your campaign fund. The other 20 we had to put that in the campaign fund, okay? He said, this $1 is for you to keep as a reminder that even though we are different parties and beliefs, we are Americans. Mr. Marks, who served this country in uniform and who now continues to engage in the political process, I think we owe it to him, owe it to all of us, to find ways, as difficult as it is, to get important things done together. And it starts with making sure we have a fair process with the lines.
One last question for today. What do you think about all of the noise in Washington these days, and how would Democrats and concerned Americans in general resist?
So let me say this. I don't want to spend too much time quabbling on the language of resisting or not. What people have to do is be Americans. This is what we do as Americans. This is not the first time somebody has been in office of either party where Americans who believed that things weren't going the right way got together, wrote their signs, showed up to talk about what they believe should be different. That is what we do. And so I want to be very clear and continue to reiterate this point that preserving democracy, preserving the freedom of the press, making sure that people can afford to live in America, that's not just the job of people who raise their hands every couple of months on the electoral cycle and have a big title. It's not just their job. It's not just the job of the press to sue and call out people who want to stymie investigative reporting. It's not just their job. It's not just the job of small business owners to say, I'm being strangled by regulation and I want to be running my business. It's not just their job. It's not just the job of young people in schools to say, hey, I want to get a high quality education. This experiment in democracy, and it is nothing but an experiment, actually does, as I began, require something of all of us. And when we try to abdicate that responsibility, and you can abdicate it in a couple of ways. You can abdicate it by saying, politics is so chaotic, so noisy, that I'm just going to shut it all off and you all tell me how the story ends. I'll check in later. Or you can abdicate it by saying, well, you know what? I vote every 6 months, and that's on y'all to figure out. Or you can abdicate it by saying, you know what? I don't have to engage even as registering to vote. This thing requires something of all of us. All of us. And when we use our system, a system that was created to be adversarial, we need people in it who are not going to spend every day themselves being adversarial. The system is adversarial enough. You know what it takes to get a bill passed in Harrisburg? I mean, and sometimes I go through this, and I will go through this. So first you've got to have a good idea, hopefully a good idea. I've seen my colleagues have some not good ideas. But first you've got to have an idea. Then you have to work with a lawyer who has to draft it up in legislative language. Then the speaker has to send it to a committee. Then you have to work with a committee chair to get it introduced in the committee. Then you have to work with a bunch of you in this room who are coming to the office to say vote for or against the bill. And if you're lucky, you get the bill out of the committee. Then it goes to the floor. Then you have to get 103 votes. 102 votes. If you get 103, you're doing real good. Then it has to go to the Senate. You got to get 26 votes. Then you got to get a governor who's willing to sign it. Then you have to have written it in such a way that the courts uphold it if it's challenged. Then you have to work with the people who work within government who actually implement it in the way that you envision in the legislative process. That's a tough, difficult process already. A process that is frustrating to families like mine who are terrified about the future for their kids, who are terrified about the challenges that they face and don't know if we have the political will to take on these challenges. That's tough enough. But when you have people who want to spend every single day trying to divide us up by religion, by race, by region, that makes it even worse. Makes it even worse. And I know we've seen a lot of folks trying to be cruel to certain members of our communities. But a lot of times that cruelty is to disguise their utter incompetence. I'm going to end where I began. These eggs are $9. I should look back through those questions and see who gave the best answer, and I'll give you this very expensive gift. We should all care about that and should care about the families whose budgets are now even more squeezed because of that reality. And I think that lowering those costs for people is a better use of our time than trying to find ways to have us fighting each other. That's what we ought to be focused on. That's what I'm going to do as a member of the legislature. That's what we're going to do as vice chair of the Democratic Party. And hopefully, we're going to win important elections and get things done for people. So God bless you guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
We'd like to thank Representative Kenyatta and wish him well. We have some mementos for him. These gifts are compliments of the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg, PCN, and the Pennsylvania Press Club. In closing, we want to thank you for joining us. Our next luncheon is Monday, March 24th. Our guest will be Congressman Glenn Thompson, Chair of the U.S. Agriculture Committee. For scheduling information, visit our website, papressclub.org. Thank you all.
Good job, guys.